Okay, so what are your thoughts about what you just heard?
It honestly made me sad because it's like it's not his fault we didn't have the resources to help him.
It is very sad. Like, it shouldn't have to take all that for people to be aware and like for him to get help.
I was gonna say it's sad because it seems like life just continues to go on and you're just like trapped in your mind. And it's like you have these episodes where you know something's going on, something's not right, and you don't know how to fix it, and you're crying out for help, and nobody can relate because they're not going through the same thing as you.
I agree. It's very disheartening to hear the story about Mike. I get what you said, Dr. Davis, about the fan. I think his kindness was really good. I think Mike's story is why we need education around like people who have concussion, so it won't go unnoticed.
Welcome to the Life, Language, and Lyrics podcast, where we love to explore our passions, live with purpose, and face our fears. I'm Laina, and some of you may know me as Dr. Davis. I'm a professor, speech language pathologist, baker, and a lover of people with a mission to bring a little Southern comfort to your day. This is the Neuro News edition of the podcast, which is airing in Brain Injury Awareness Month. And we're going to be highlighting stories and essential information about brain injury with a very specific focus on sports related concussion. The goal is to spread awareness and education on the effects of brain injury and also shine a light on the critical role of speech language pathologists and other professionals who help in the recovery and support of these people. If you've been following me for a while, then you may remember Brain Injury Chronicles. So the Chronicles are back, and this time I have some special guests. Today I have some very special guests. I have Autumn Boone, Jasmine Branch, Amanda Melendez, and Ime Effiong. They are all graduate student researchers in my clinic and research lab, the Center for Cognitive-Communicative Skills, or as we like to call it, the CCC Skills Lab. This lab is a clinic and research lab that focuses on brain and sports related injuries for people of all ages, and we support athletes, people who've experienced brain injury, and even those who may have neurodivergence. And so we also are addressing health disparities and cultural responsiveness for these populations. Thank y'all for joining me today.
Of course. Thank you for
Thank you
having
for having
me.
Thank you
me.
for having me.
Okay, so once again, thank you all for being here. I'm so excited to get to represent the lab. And just for the people watching, just know that these young ladies have been with me now for 2 years. So they have put in the work and they're getting ready to graduate. How y'all feel about that?
So excited.
Good.
Okay, so first, I mentioned your names already, but why don't you go around and tell us your name, where you're from, and why you are interested in concussion or brain injury? We'll start with Amanda.
I'm Amanda Melendez, and I'm from Broward, Florida. And I'm interested in sports related concussions because I myself was an athlete and I love the atmosphere of being around sports. And I just want to be an SLP that is able to give back to the community and identify those concussion symptoms and provide treatment. And I also am very interested in brain disorders.
Great, thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Autumn Boone. I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'm interested in the brain because I'm really interested in understanding how the body works as a whole. And when something goes wrong, how do you fix it? And especially as a speech language pathologist, how we can provide intervention and strategies for patients who have had a brain injury.
Great, thank you for that. Jasmine?
Hi, I'm Jasmine Branch. I'm from Williamstown, New Jersey, and my interest in TBI came from when I was working as a tech in an outpatient and an inpatient clinic. I really enjoyed meeting the patients and seeing how someone could come in and have severe brain damage and how we could give them strategies to help them to get back into the community and just seeing how fast they can improve and get back to their lives and daily tasks.
And MA.
My name is Emma Afiang. I am from Houston, Texas, and I'm interested in concussion because I've seen the effects of it with my own family members, and I'm just interested in the brain and how it's very vital to the field of speech language pathology, but also how it's very vital to just life in general and outside the field.
I'm gonna start with you, MA, since you were the last one to introduce yourself. Why is it important for people to learn about the impact of concussion?
I feel it's very important because concussion can go, let's say, misdiagnosed, or it can be seen as like, or not seen, or just be seen as invisible. Like, let's say someone's walking down the street, they're irritable, or they're very like sensitive to just say stimuli around them. But when you look at them, you just see an irritated person. You don't know that they could have had a traumatic brain injury. And so I think it's important to provide education for them so you can know how to have awareness of someone who has concussion, and just to know how to treat them, and just to, yeah, that's it.
Okay, I think that that's spot on. That's a great reason for why we need to know about the impact of concussions. Okay, so Amanda, you told us that you yourself were an athlete. Why should we focus on athletes when talking about concussion?
So athletes really should know of and be aware of concussions, have that educational background on concussions, on noticing the signs and symptoms, being able to express how they're feeling, advocate for themselves, catch it early so they don't end up with chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, which we'll talk about more. Um, yeah, so it's very important for athletes to take care of their health because health comes first. Aside from the games, it's just a game. Athletes tend to take it way too seriously, but their health comes first.
Mm-hmm. Well, and because athletes are passionate, right? Passionate about the sport.
Yes.
I'm gonna ask you a little follow-up question. Why, or I guess I'll say this: how likely is the risk for athletes to get concussion? Is it high? Is it low?
It's high,
Mm-hmm. Why is that?
especially playing in football when you're getting hit with this fast impact. Many athletes tend to get coup contra coup injuries, which is very much relatable in football. When you're getting that impact, you get the coup, that impact where you first feel it and then your head goes back and forth on the opposite side of the brain. You're getting that extra impact. So it's very dangerous.
Yeah, that's good. And you bring up a term that some people listening might not know what it is. And you already said the coup is that initial injury, right? When your head first, your brain first makes the impact with the skull, wherever that is, that's the coup. And then the opposite end of the brain then hits the skull, and that's the contra coup. So thank you for sharing that. And you also mentioned CTE. And so, Autumn, if you had to explain CTE or chronic traumatic encephalopathy to someone with no medical background, how would you describe it?
Okay. CTE is a brain disease caused by repeated head injuries, for example, like a concussion, and it slowly damages the brain, affecting memory, mood, and behavior. And people with CTE may experience problems like memory loss, difficulty thinking clearly, and changes in personality, sometimes even leading to violent or impulsive behavior. And basically, it really is a slow, progressive condition that gets worse over time.
Okay, thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
And Jasmine, so we're getting ready to get into a story, right? About somebody who has experienced CTE. Why do you think it's important that we share the stories of those who experience the long-term effects of brain injury?
I think it's important because I would say it's important because we need to know the history in order to make changes for the future. So if we know what had occurred or how things happen that cause effects to the brain, we would be able to make changes to help people, maybe find treatments, maybe even cures, so we could counteract the effects or just get rid of CTE, concussions, TBIs in general.
Goal of these stories, or these brain injury chronicles that I call them, is to share stories of individuals that didn't necessarily get to speak up for themselves. Um, this is a story of someone who's no longer with us. There are some interviews out there and some different stories. And so our overall goal is to make sure that we're honoring the person and also providing education at the same time. So let's talk about Mike Webster. They called him Iron Mike because Mike was 6'1", 255 pounds. Okay. And he was an all Big Ten center at Wisconsin, and he played for the Pittsburgh Steelers. From 1975 to 1986, he had a string of 150 consecutive starts. That means that he was always on the field. He was a starting player. Okay. And he played about 15 seasons, about 220 games. And for the Steelers, that at that time, it was more than any other player in history had played. And so he was the team's offensive captain for 9 seasons, and he was considered to be the strongest Steeler, which is why they called him Iron Mike, with the steel, Mike, all of that, right? So he even won Ironman competition in 1980 to kind of give more credit to his name. Okay. And so what other people would say about him was that he was a beast. They said it'd be freezing cold, and you know it gets cold in Pittsburgh, right? He would cut his sleeves off and just kind of to intimidate the other team members. He was part of 4 Super Bowls that they won. He played in 6 AFC championships, and he was an all pro choice 7 times. Okay. And I share all of that just to show, like, he was tough, right? He was tough. He was a good play. He was a great player. The city of Pittsburgh loved him so much. And then I think in about 1988, became a free agent. He went off to Kansas City as like a coach. But then after about a few weeks, he was like back at his old spot playing. Um, the reason we're talking about Mike Webster is because in 2002, he died of a heart attack at the age of 50. Okay. The hospital reported that it was a acute myocardial infarction, which basically means it's a heart attack. Okay. He also had experienced depression secondary to post-concussion syndrome. And first, we'll just talk a little bit about Mike and what he had going on prior to his passing, and then it'll lead us into the purpose of our talk. So he was an honor student when he was in college. He was a big reader. But as he was experiencing these multiple concussions and hits while playing the game, his memory started to take a toll. And so it got to the place where he couldn't even remember the simple things. So he got to where he couldn't remember how to get home, so he would just sleep in his car. And then I think around his last season in 1990, his wife was trying to convince him, she had convinced him to move back home to Wisconsin, which was like their hometown. And it was at that time where she was recognizing that he had changed. Something was different about him. Physically, he was disoriented. He was behaving kind of strange. He had about 8 jobs in 4 years. So he was having a hard time keeping a job, right? And so he was initially this very reliable man who his ex-wife said he read Bible stories to his children at bedtime. And then he just started to disappear in his car for days. And she didn't really realize that he had brain injury. She just thought that he was angry at her, right? Which kind of alludes back to what y'all were saying earlier, is that sometimes people don't know that a person has brain injury. And at this time too, they weren't talking about it in the NFL. And so his wife talked about him as like having a lot of kindness in his heart. You know, he'd open doors, he'd call when he said he'd call, he had a soft spot for children, all those kind of things. But then something started to change, right? And she would say that he would become very lethargic. He would forget to eat. And he would go into these rages, right? And we talk about brain injury in class where there can be some signs of aggression uh, coming from what damage to what area of the brain. I'm gonna put y'all on the spot. Where does that aggression come from?
The
From the frontal.
amygdala?
Frontal lobe and amygdala, right? There's emotion from the amygdala, but the frontal lobe is also where we learn to make good decisions about what we do. It helps us to, when it's in function, it helps us to be able to control our actions and impulsivities and all those kind of things. And so he was doing some really strange things. So in addition to his rages, like one day he just got up from the dinner table and he peed in the oven. And then he came back to the table like nothing had happened. Okay. And then he'd wander off through Pittsburgh. When he was there, he'd sleep under bridges. He'd sleep in the Amtrak station, then in his truck. And then I think they also were saying like he would get access to guns and he would walk up to strangers and do rants like saying, I'm going to kill them and stuff. So we also know that those are the kind of things that can get somebody sent to prison. And then at another point, his teeth started to fall out and he would replace them with super glue. Okay. And so it tells you a lot about what he was dealing with, right? The
Mhm.
decision making, that frontal lobe, right? How do you problem solve? Well, he wanted to write like thousands of letters, so he would take duct tape and wrap it around his hand with the pen so that he could write. And then because he had damage on his feet, I think he had like open wounds, and he would use duct tape to close up the spaces, um, to close up the wounds pretty much. And then because he was having a hard time sleeping, his thought process, the way he problem solved that, was to buy a taser and tase himself in the stomach or his thigh. So he was zapping himself to sleep. And so he would zap himself to calm his nerves because he felt it was like what we would call anxiety happening, right? And he would do this like 10 to 20 times to relax. Could you imagine that?
Oh,
I know.
so sad.
And then we mentioned CTE earlier, and CTE is very close to Alzheimer's, where there's this plaque that builds in the brain, and it's like plaques and tangles tangling up the brain. It is going to those neurons and it is causing those neurons to die. And then in parts of just like how he was taking care of himself, or even his family, he had always been somebody who was very good with finances, and he handled the money. He handled all of the financial affairs. And so his wife had started recognizing that he wasn't opening the mail, he wasn't paying the bills, and he wasn't filing the taxes. So what does that mean for him and his family?
Bankruptcy.
They might, maybe so, right? So what ended up happening was they had like several $1 million in assets when he retired, but they had this like Victorian home that was foreclosed in 18 months after he left football. He poured out most of his savings. And so, that's really why his wife was like, I can't do this. She didn't know what was going on. She just knew like something ain't right. You've changed, you scaring us. And I gotta go because I gotta make sure these kids are okay. Okay. He did try to get help. He was on some medications, and he would reach out to folks, but people also didn't really recognize what was happening with him. But there was a man that I think he was like the owner of like a grocery store, and he was a super big fan of Mike, and so he had found a way to reach out to him and tried to help him when he could. And a lot of times Mike would be calling him at like 2 a.m. to say that he was lost. Um, and so that pretty much was what was happening with Mike. All right, so what are your thoughts about what you just heard?
It
For
honestly, oh, go ahead,
No, go
Jasmine.
ahead, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say it honestly made me sad because it's like it's not his fault. We didn't have the resources to help him.
It is very sad. I want to say that like it shouldn't have to take all that for people to be aware and like for him to get help.
I was gonna say it's sad because it seems like life just continues to go on and you're just like trapped in your mind. And it's like you have these episodes where you know something's going on, something's not right, and you don't know how to fix it, and you're crying out for help, and nobody can relate because they're not going through the same thing as you.
Yeah, I agree. It's very disheartening to hear the story about Mike. But I get what you said, Dr. Davis, about the grocery, but about the fan. I think his kindness was really good, but I think Mike's story is why we need education around like people who have concussion, so it won't go unnoticed.
And his condition, it got so bad to the point where I was reading that he was harming himself when he was homeless and sleeping in his car. Like to be in that mental state, to have to do that and feel like, to resort to that because he's like trapped in his emotions, not able to get the help that he needs. Like he knew he was deteriorating. So
I know in the movie Concussion, when I watched it last week, I think there was another football player that was going through like similar symptoms that he was going through, and he like reached out to him and he's like, you just kind of have to deal with it. Like, I'm dealing with it too. Just, figure it out. And it's just really sad to hear like back then people didn't know what they knew. There wasn't that support system out there. And even now, like as information is coming out, I feel like people don't know enough still, or people kind of like shun it. Like in the movie, I know a lot of fans when they were hearing like CTE, they were like, "Oh no, he was the best thing ever. Like he was this big football player." And people just couldn't wrap their heads around the diagnosis.
So wrong. They used terms that made it sound like it was just something you could just shake off, and they literally just told people to shake it off.
mhm.
Um, and didn't really realize that happening multiple times over and over was leading to some very long-term challenges. And even speaking of, him saying, you just got to tough it out. So what was consistent about what people said about him too was that he never really complained. And he also tried to reassure people that he wasn't as didn't have as much damage as it seemed. But also we have to remember the culture, right? It's a very, you got to be strong. He's been called Iron Mike. He's been the strongest man on the team. He's a strong man in general. He's a big guy. And so there's also this mentality. I think the stigma is what really keeps people from saying something is wrong.
I was thinking the same thing, how he was in the shake it off era back in the day. Like they were just encouraged to shake it off. And he played for over 15 years. So I researched like the average amount of time an NFL football player plays, how long their career is, and it's 3.5 years now.
Mhm.
So it's
Yeah,
interesting to
he played a
compare.
long time. He's like LeBron of football. right? Playing a long time. So let's go into how they found out he had CTE, right? So we talk a lot about CTE. We hear people mentioning it. Oh, this person probably has CTE. They probably have CTE. So the truth is, we don't know until the person has passed away and an autopsy is done of their brain. And that's how they found this in Mike Webster. I call this episode The Brain That Snitched on the NFL because he was one of the first former NFL players that they found CTE in the brain. And this was done by Dr. Bennett Amalu. He's a medical examiner and a neuropathologist. And he just happened to be the person who Mike Webster's body came to. And Dr. Amalu did not know anything about American football. So he had an idea of like how harsh the sport was, but he didn't know actually what it entailed, and he didn't know who Webster was when they brought his body to him. And so, he goes in and he does this autopsy, and basically what they find is that this 50-year-old man has the brain of a 70-year-old. It is an aged brain because the plaques and tangles from CTE have caused the brain to deteriorate. Okay. And so Dr. Amalu initially, what he was thinking about was when he was thinking about football and brain trauma, he was thinking about what we call dementia pugilistica, which is punch drunk syndrome. They usually use that term with boxers. And it was the characteristics that he was showing were kind of similar: the dementia, delusion, some paranoia, explosive behavior, and the memory loss. Memory loss is always going to be something that shows up. And that is also caused by repeated blows to the head. Okay. And so when Dr. Amalu goes into his brain, he's just seeing stuff that he wasn't expecting to see for somebody who had a heart attack. Right. And so he just kept cutting deeper and deeper. And that's how he found the protein called tau, because it also does not show up in neuroimaging. Right. You have to slice the brain and look deeply under microscope. And so Dr. Amalu had the pleasure of finding this, but he also had the challenge of finding this, right? And so, those of you who know the story, what happened when he started putting this out there?
People were calling him a fake.
Mm-hmm.
And as an African man, they were racist towards him,
Mm-hmm.
putting him down, calling him racist slurs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think he was getting some death threats too. Like people were calling his house.
Yep.
Like going after his family. I mean, I saw that in the movie Concussion.
He had a pretty tough time. Like, he eventually moved. He was like, I don't even know if I want to do this anymore. And now you can follow him on Instagram. He's like living his best life with his family. But it can be a really hard thing trying to get people to acknowledge what's happening. And at this time, it was just him. It was just Mike Webster. Now they have found CTE in the brains of hundreds, if not maybe 1,000 or so former NFL players, because now they're getting more people to donate their brains to research.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And oh, I did want to make an adjustment to something I said. It was like he had been in over 100 automobile accidents. They said actually it was like it had been 25,000. That's how much he had been hit. And if you think about it, he played in the NFL for 15 years, but how much did he play before that? Because when do football players typically start?
From birth.
From
Sister,
young.
Yes,
babies.
kids.
Now at his age, I don't know when Pee Wee football started. So somebody can comment and tell us when Pee Wee started. But he probably had been playing a long time because he played in college, right? Probably played in high school. Um, and so that makes sense to get hit that much, and you started all the time. That's a lot. That's a whole lot on the body and a whole lot on the brain. And then it. if you did watch the movie Concussion, is our brain designed for the type of hits that happen in football?
No,
Nope.
No.
How's our brain sitting in our skull?
it's fragile.
What's keeping our brain from touching the skull? Is it a structure? Is it a fluid?
The fluid.
Yeah, the cerebral spinal fluid.
Remember?
My favorite thing to talk about, right? Hardly, it's just sitting in there like the yolk of an egg without that much protection. Because we're not designed for those kind of hits. And I'll also make a disclaimer. You know, people are like, well, people are going to play football. I'm like, yes, I know. I know people are going to play football. I know that people are going to play basketball. They're going to box. People are going to ride ATVs. They're going to ride horses. Concussions, they're not going to stop, right? Because they can happen in any kind of way. But I think where the difficulty and the trouble happens, or where we put people at a disadvantage, is when we don't protect them when the injury happens. And especially at the time Mike was playing, if he got hit and he experienced a concussion during a game, he was immediately going right back out. There was no concussion protocol. There was no protocol to keep him from going back out there and giving his brain time to heal. So remember, we also talked about second impact syndrome, where your brain doesn't get a chance to heal before the next injury happens. He could have been experiencing multiple weeks of head injury and just pushing through it because that's what he was taught to do.
They said 70,000 blows to the head
That sounds probably about right.
in the movie.
That sounds about right. Yeah, that's what Dr. Amalu predicted, right?
Yes.
He had probably been hit that many times. I'm going to put some questions. Let me see. And any one of you can answer. How do you think his story, the story of Mike Webster, has influenced how professional sport leagues handle brain injuries today?
I feel like it brought much needed attention to the overall issues of brain injuries in sports, especially the NFL. More research has taken place on CTE. There are stricter concussion protocols, just overall changes in how concussions are managed. And there's a greater standard for safety now, I feel like.
And also, after the movie came out, I was reading that the NFL made a statement saying that they've had a 34% decrease in concussions. So the movie definitely spread a lot of awareness.
I feel like there was awareness made, but there's still so much more that we have to do. So we're looking at injuries of head and neck injuries of athletes right now, and I'm starting to notice, like going through the statistics that are available, that a lot of athletes are going back on the field after having a concussion or a head injury or a neck injury, like the day after, and they're practicing on the field. And then next thing you know, like a week later, they're not in the game and they're just like finished for the season.
I have a protocol, and you'll see them go into, I think they call it the blue tent. And when an athlete gets an injury, they go into this tent, and there's all these like different medical professionals in there, and they're doing some form of testing. I would imagine that sometimes the questions are questions they can answer, because we know that even with our test, a person with concussion can do extremely well on the test, right? It's like you really have to dig a lot deeper to see where the issues are, or they might not show up until a little bit later. Because I've had that happen quite a bit, that an athlete felt okay and good, and then a couple days later or a week later, symptoms started to like show up. And sometimes it's just as like more demanding things are coming, or maybe the lights are too bright, or there's too much sound or something, and it starts to impact them. And thinking about Mike Webster. How do you think CTE impacted his, we kind of see how it impacted his personality, right? But how did it also shape like his relationships and his quality of life?
For what you told us, Dr. Davis, I think for his quality of life, I think it diminished it a lot based on like let's say the when he was injuring himself, like he was doing physical harm to his body, but it also deteriorating his mind and for relationships. I think it had a harmful effect. I mean, this is a guy who was well known, very popular. And if you see, let's say, a famous person or somebody at his status, like kind of going through this stuff, your initial reaction is to kind of shun them, like, oh, they seem what they got like going on. I'm not gonna really reach out to them or root for them. I think, let's say, in his immediate family, let's say with his wife, she didn't really know what was going on. So she was probably very frightened of the whole, let's say, of his whole what he was going through. I don't know. I think did he have children too?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, even with probably impacting his relationship with his children. I mean, like you see your dad. I mean, I know in my life, I see my dad like struggle, kind of like, oh gosh, like, what's going on with dad? Like, I don't even know like what to help him. He probably didn't know how to help him, and so I just think it really diminished all those like relationships in his life, and also his quality of life as well.
Mm, appreciate that. Um, and so now a lot of the things he was dealing with were outside of our scope of practice, right? As speech language pathologists. So things dealing with depression and self-harm and all of that, we would definitely have to refer out. And he would have to get those things together before actually starting speech therapy and getting it to a solid place where he can process and comprehend well and all those kind of things to start something like speech pathology. What do you think we would be focusing on with a patient like Mike Webster?
I think we would focus on pragmatics, social skills, getting him back into the world, and then of course cognitive treatment with dementia and memory loss symptoms.
Sounds good. Any other thoughts? What about memory?
For sure, short term and long term, they'll definitely be addressed in speech therapy.
I'll ask you this. How does short-term memory transfer to long-term memory?
Short term builds into long term memory. I mean, it depends when you've had the interaction, but let's say you went to the store yesterday, that's a short term memory, but like memories of your childhood, that's a long term memory.
You talk about short-term and long-term, but what is the space in between that?
Working memory.
Works, right? To process it for long-term memory. And that is the part that people with concussion, mild TBI generally have a hard time with, is that working memory. Okay. Um, and I guess I'll ask you this. How can we improve the way we talk about concussions and brain injuries to ensure that athletes take them seriously? Or even coaches and other people who are stakeholders in that with that population. How can we improve the way we talk about it?
I think we could go out into the schools, guest speakers, informing children at a young age, maybe in PE class or little leagues.
I agree with Amanda in spreading that education to let's say local schools, but even let's say with the NFL, since they reach a wider audience, maybe we can. I mean, I don't know. Connect, you have connections, network through social media, and
Mm.
also like let's say they have advertisements all the time, like say for the Super Bowl or just normal games. You could have just like I guess a PSA. I don't know if they do that, but like stuff like that within that organization or even on TV, like to reach out to just the public audience as well.
Do y'all have any questions for me about Mike, about concussion with athletes?
I think for me, for my question, I mean, I wonder, I know he developed CTE later in life, but I wonder if there were any signs when he was playing during the NFL that people saw or even often dismissed before it got to Dr. Omalu's attention.
Well, it's quite possible because it wasn't that long after he left football that his house was in foreclosure, right? 15 months, that's just a little over a year. So there probably were some signs, maybe some signs of aggression and things that started to develop. And I think there's some interviews. I don't know if they talk much about while, like in the last few years of playing the sport or not. But it's very likely that there were some signs showing. I mean, even, with some of that's why we hear about it a lot of times now because there's a bit of a over exaggeration too, right? Where if an athlete does anything that seems out of pocket, that they're labeling them with CTE. And I'm very cautious about that. I don't do that. I don't post. This person probably has CTE. First, I want to ask y'all this question: if you were a songwriter and you were going to create a song to tell Mike's story, what themes, not the songs, but just the themes, would you highlight when thinking about his life?
I think you definitely need to look at the struggle of overall life, loss, and just the emotional toll of having a brain injury, and kind of how he went from someone who was a strong, successful athlete to someone who became basically isolated and confused, and maybe things of like self-doubt, regret, and things along that nature.
I would tell a song from his life starting like his football career and like start with it being motivational and how strong he was to get to that point, and then the part where like he hit rock bottom and talk about the impact on his emotions and everything that came with it affecting his brain. So yeah.
I want to know, this will give me some thoughts about your musical taste because that's something we haven't talked about in lab. Okay. Um, which song you feel like best captures the emotional weight of this story?
Maybe I Will Survive, because that song.
Go ahead, Autumn. Sorry.
I was saying he had a lot of ambition.
Yeah, and I feel like that song is talking about not giving up, even though you may be facing struggles.
Okay, I
It's a
like
good
that.
one. I would say there's this song by TLC called Something Wicked This Way It Comes.
Mhm.
And it talks about like why life is the way it is and the struggles that come with it.
I was gonna say A Change Is Gonna Come by Otis Redding, even though it's about like civil rights, but I was thinking in relation to like he started a chain reaction.
Yeah, he was the brain that snitched on the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
All right, so can you think of any songs or lyrics that capture the struggle of losing oneself to illness or injury?
Yes, I'm Not the Only One by Sam Smith.
Mm,
I feel like that song is just like he's having a battle with his own mind, and that's basically what's happening in this story. So I
yeah,
felt like that was a good song for that.
yeah, that sounds like a good match.
Hmm.
There's one song that I know. It's called I'm Not Okay by her. And so she just talks about like just what she's going through in that song and just how she feels or mental health more. So I picked that.
Okay. I'm liking these song choices. They're very thoughtful too, very insightful.
For losing someone, Also, the same song I said earlier, Something Wicked This Way Comes by TLC. There's a part of the lyrics that says, sometimes, wait, I just don't understand the ways of the world today. Sometimes I feel like there's nothing to live for, so I'm longing for the days of yesterday.
Yeah, that's deep. That's deep. Okay. And then last song, what is a song or lyrics that you would share with someone dealing with the challenges that Mike Webster had?
Okay, so this is gonna be a take, but it's gonna make sense. So, Started from the Bottom by Drake, because that song is really about overcoming adversity, pushing through difficult situations, and finding success through the odds. And it talks about growth and rising above challenges, and that's what we really want to extend to Mike Webster. You know, for someone dealing with the physical and emotional challenges that come with brain injuries, this song could serve as a reminder for recovery, support, and progress.
Okay. All right. You felt that one. I could feel it.
That's a good
Yes,
one.
yes, I
I could
did.
feel it. I could feel it. Okay.
Yes.
Who else?
I'm gonna pick a oldie but a goodie song. It's I think it was like Ain't No Mountain. No, that's it. Yeah, Ain't No Mountain High by I forget. I forget who the other artist is, but I just love that song. And it talks about like really there's nothing that can come your way. Like whatever you're going through, you're gonna make it through. That's the song I would choose.
Ain't no mountain high
Yeah.
enough.
No, no Pain, No Gain by Betty Wright.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. That sounds like something Mike Webster would have said.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yep.
Any other?
I was gonna say Human by Brandy,
Okay.
because you're out there in society and everybody's watching you and your every move, and you feel like you have to be perfect and guarded. And when you try and share what's really going on in your life, it's like you're oversharing and people don't want to hear it or they don't understand.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Y'all have a nice musical repertoire. Okay, thank you for that. And then the last thing I'll ask you is also for someone who might be dealing with feeling like something is changing or even in the place of knowing that some changes have happened, what is an affirmation? It could be an affirmation, a quote, or a scripture that you would share.
I have a scripture, Jeremiah 29, verse 11. It says,
Mm,
For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. And for me, it just kind of reminds me, that, he's in control. He has
mhm,
plans for your life.
mhm.
Ooh.
Mhm.
Hey, thank you for that one. That's a good one.
I have a Bible verse too. It's actually on my vision board. It's from Joshua 1:9. It says, Be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged, for the Lord will be with you.
That's nice.
Just,
I
yeah.
think I have both of those on my board.
I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
Hey,
Amen.
Mhm.
that is my best friend.
Yeah.
So she has said that since I've known her in the sixth grade.
Oh, that's so cute.
Yeah.
It's
I
a
was
good one.
gonna say Isaiah 41:10. This is a verse I used to read like every day at my first externship. Shout
Mm.
out to Rosalie Bacody. Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee, ye. I will help thee, ye. I will uphold thee with the right hand, with my right hand of righteousness.
Mm. Okay, great job. Great job. I love them all. Well, I think we're at the end, y'all. Thank you so much for taking your evening time. For those who are watching, second years, they have full-time clinic, they have a full course load, but they have decided in all this busyness that they still wanted to participate in the lab. And so it makes my heart filled with joy. And I hope that, you guys will still stay in touch after you graduate, okay?
Of course.
Um, all right. Thank you all for watching. The CCC Skills Lab is connected to the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders in the Kathy C. Hughes School of Communications at the Howard University.
You
You
know.
know.
All right, so that's a wrap for this episode of Life, Language, and Lyrics. I hope you learned something new. I hope you feel compelled to spread awareness about brain health and brain injury. And if you enjoyed the show, be sure to like, subscribe, and follow on YouTube and Instagram. Instagram, you can find me at overall neuro underscore Dr. D, but also at Life, Language, Lyrics. Your support helps spread the word and keep these conversations going. So until next time, take care, stay inspired, and keep showing up for yourself. See y'all soon.